Second reading comes from the book of Esther, chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. So the king and Haman went into the feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, as they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Queen answered, "If I have won your favor, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me, that is my petition, and the lives of my people, that is my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have held my peace. But no enemy can compensate for this damage to the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he and where is he? Who has presumed to do this?" Esther said, "A foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king rose from the feast in wrath and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that the king had determined to destroy him. When the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman had thrown himself on the couch where Esther was reclining, and the king said, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house?" As the words left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance of the king, said, "Look, the very gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose words saved the king, stands at Haman's house, 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on that." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the anger of the king abated. This is the word of the Lord. One problem we have with stories in the Bible is making them child appropriate. Anyone ever seen the VeggieTales story of Queen Esther? Doesn't sound anything like that. Now, to be fair, it's really hard to hang pickles. But the thing is that we tell stories to the children out of the Bible because they are important stories. They need to know them, but I'll say this, we Disneyfy them, right? I said that came up earlier in this week, a discussion about some of the Disney movies, like Frozen and Snow White and things like that. Well, if you go back and look at a lot of these Disney movies, if you read the original source material that was written, especially the stuff by the Brothers Grimm, those stories aren't anything the same either. They usually don't end in happy endings. Usually, the antagonist, even if there is a change, doesn't come out so well. A lot of times, the villains in those movies are almost made slightly sympathetic. Not so in the stories. That's the challenge we have. And it's the other challenge that we have of Scripture of sometimes there are parts where Scripture is really trying to tell us about real life, about how the world works, and it makes us uncomfortable because it brings up humanity, it brings up parts of our bodies that we don't want to talk about in public. Even more so, it brings up the harsh reality of the human condition of jealousy, of anger, of hate, the desire for murder, retributions. Scripture brings out in us sometimes the worst of ourselves, but it does that so that we can see it and turn around and work on it, change it. Now, there's something I really, really want to get into with the story of Esther, but it's going to have to be a Bible study sometime. But my first question today is, how many people would say they know the story of Esther? Okay, so those of you who half-heartedly put your hand halfway up, I'm going to ask you, is that because you don't want people to see you raising your hand, or because you don't want to claim that you really know it? So I'll ask again, how many people would say they know the story of Esther? Okay, we've got some that went to 3/4 that time, not quite all the way up. Okay, so if you were looking around, you noticed that maybe 1 in 10 in here would say they know the story of Esther. It's an important book. It's an important story, but it's also one that we can easily set aside in the faith, because much like the book of Ruth, it does something that challenges historical human desire, and that is it undermines that only men have done powerful things in the Bible. It cuts down the concept that women had no abilities to affect the life of the nation. But that's exactly what this young woman does. Now, how does Queen Esther become part of the royal court? They had to find a perfect woman for the king, right? So they have this beauty pageant. And Mordecai. Yeah, Mordecai makes sure that Esther is in there. Now, when Esther becomes part of the court, where does she end up? Eunuch finds favor, but she ends up in the harem of the king, right? She's part of that big group of women. Now, she slowly works her way into a space where she has the king's confidence. She works her way into the space where she is the favored one. She does a lot of good things in this. And one of her main goals, though, is the concern for the Israelites. The Israelites who are serving the king, not in Jerusalem. These are the exiles. Now, to be fair, it's not as bad as it had been in Egypt. But it's still not great. Anyone here enjoy being a slave of some other group and having to live your life that way? No, we don't. Anyone ever had to deal with that potential in your life? No. And if you need a rehash on the definition of privilege, there you go. If you have never been in a place where you fear that you may be enslaved or be made lesser to serve others, that's privilege. Now, just like in Egypt, there are a few of the Jews who have been able to raise themselves into places to be power brokers of the oppressors. And what we get in Scripture is not the ones who went, I see what's going on here, and for my own safety, I'm going to go along with the oppressor. You have those who say, the only way for me to fix the oppressor and to get my people out of oppression is to be on the inside and fight from there. So Mordecai is able to help Esther ascend to this place. Now, Esther has what we could call the Jesus moment, right? Jesus, just before going to the cross, prays out to God and says what? Take this cup away from me if it be your will. But, O Lord, if it is your will, I will drink this cup. Right? That one moment to say, I'm not sure that I want to do this. Esther has that moment too, and Mordecai says to her, look, if you don't want to do it, that's fine. But at some point, God will send someone. She realizes we can do it now, or we can wait and wait and wait. Now, Haman's one of the favored of the king, right? Does anyone know why Haman hates Mordecai? Very good. Mordecai will not bow down to Haman and recognize Haman as superior. And one instance is that Mordecai is at the gates to the palace. Here comes Haman, and Mordecai just sits and looks at him and says, "Hey." There's no getting up and going, "Oh, great Haman, Lord, oh, I'm so lowly, oh, you're so great." There's not that. And Haman is really mad. How dare he not bow to me? Haman's plan becomes not only retribution against Mordecai, who will not bow down to him, but he begins the plan to destroy and kill all of the Jews living in the land. Sound like a familiar plot anywhere? So Esther plans this dinner, gets her ally the king and her enemy Haman to come and to feast together, And note that this feast isn't just a one-time meal. It's not until the second day of the feast, that they're drinking and celebrating, that finally the king says to Esther, "What is it? What is it that you want?" "I want my people to be safe, and it's him. He did it. That's the one. I want him gone." Does Haman have to die? No, Mordecai didn't have to die. But Haman was going to hang Mordecai to signal the start, to hang Mordecai to show his dominance over this one. And his whole plan is wiped away. Now, what Jewish celebration comes out of the story of Esther? Purim. Okay? Purim is this great, joyful celebration, and it celebrates a time in which salvation came. Redemption came for the Israelites. It's a time to look at the oppressors and boo them. And then when they're overthrown, to be joyful and celebrate. But if you read the scriptures, it's a time in which the celebration is much more about taking care of others, taking food to those who do not have, sharing gifts with one another, getting together to celebrate a remembrance. But not just a remembrance, but looking forward to when the Messiah, the Christ, will fulfill God's plan. This is a wonderful story because it is the very human condition. It is the problem that continues to face the world day after day. Someone thinks that they are better than someone else and takes advantage of them, oppresses them, tells the rest of the world, "I'm better than those people." In fact, those people, they're not even people. Our own heritage shows that we decided that a slave's life wasn't even worth half of ours. Dehumanizing someone makes it easier to oppress them because you don't see them as human. And eventually, the more and more you press them, they start to see themselves as not human. We have before our society in the past couple of years a big reversal in dynamics of power between men and women. The Me Too movements, the accusations that come out about men in power. And almost all of them ring true and with truth. Yet we still look at it and want to say that the men are innocent. We still look at it and question, well, yeah, they did something bad, but look at how good of a person they are. Look at what good they do everywhere else. Let's go back to some scriptures earlier in the month. If you hold all of the law, but you murder, you failed at all the law. You did good in everything else, but you decided to assault women. You failed. We've long held in our society the concept that men are better than women. Leave It to Beaver gave us the ideal that was supposed to be the American life. Right? June cleaning the house in her dress and pearls. Women, how many of you spent time truly cleaning your house in dress and pearls? Were you constantly cooking in the kitchen in your dress and pearls? Now, I understand that there is the truth to that family existed. There is nowhere in the history of my family, my parents, their parents, their parents' parents, and so on, in which there was ever a time that both husband and wife were not working. So where does that put my family? Well, based on what we've been sold in our society, that puts us in the lower class. Because the middle class was the class where the man worked, the wife stayed home, took care of the house, and raised the kids. And I just don't know many people who had that or currently have that. But it also put a bad situation again in that it made it so that men were the truth tellers and women would make things up. We didn't listen to the women when they said, I was attacked. I mean, there's still today, there was an assistant principal a few days ago, and I don't remember where it was now, but that in the middle of talking to the school about proper dress said, and it's all the women's fault. The girls don't dress the right way, and however they dress, it makes the boys do bad things. That is still an overarching ideal in our society. That men aren't responsible for themselves depending on how women dress. One great thing I heard someone say was, well, if that's the case, if we need to act on how we think people are dressed, any guy who goes out in a hockey jersey or football jersey around town, we're free to go and tackle them. And when we're in court, they're saying, you assaulted him. No, he was wearing a jersey. He was asking for it. Are we really going to let that go in court? We have this problem, and it is the problem that exists deep in Scripture. It exists in the places when we start taking off the children's story and looking at the deeper consequences of Scripture. Now, when we talk about privilege, we're not talking about silver spoon privilege. I mean, yeah, I wanted to grow up as Ricky Schroeder and have a cool dad that had a train running through the house and that race car bed and all sorts of things. It's a great show because, you're like, that's every young boy's dream, is to live in that house where essentially you can't do anything wrong and you get to play with awesome toys all day long. That's not privilege. Privilege is me. Right now, I sit at the peak of privilege. I am a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant and preacher on top of that, who is 40. Oh, Lord. Middle-aged, so right in the middle of all of it, at the top of my game, with a beautiful wife and wonderful children. That's privilege. And I know it is because in my pastoral search, the picture of me and my family played heavily in whether or not I got calls. It was a privilege I had, and I know it is. It's a privilege I have every day I walk out the door, that I really have nothing to fear outside. And that's why we need more Esthers. That's why we need more people who are able to get into the halls of power to say, this is not right. We need the whole cultural paradigm to shift. And the problem is, it takes those of us who are in the positions of power and privilege to understand our role in oppression and to say it is not right. The gospel speaks to those who are oppressed, those who are underfoot of the other, the large other. And that ain't most of us in here, folks. We're the other side of it. But the gospel speaks to us too, to ask us to evaluate that and change that mindset. That is true salvation, to open our eyes to the truth and reality of this world, and to take the time and effort to say it is not right, and not just say, well, it's too big of a deal, I'm not going to spend any time trying to fix it. The fix comes when each one of us does our little part. The glory of God shines in our hearts. The voice of Christ speaks through us in our words and in our actions. We have been blessed. We have been gifted. We are graced. And we are called to make that the living truth for everyone around us.